first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be organizing and hosting again this event. So this is the second edition of the Future of Workers, this partnership event between the Moment and DesignTO. So thanks for showing up, for coming out for the event, and also thank you for Technion for hosting us. We'll be talking about the future of work, and specifically we're taking an angle of the organization design. So we're going to hear from my fellow panelists and myself about that. But before we start, I want also to take a moment to do the land acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And I think a big learning for me this year was that when we do the land acknowledgement, we should not just recite it, but also take a moment to reflect on what it means. And I think this is specifically relevant for us tonight, since we are talking about the future of workers. I think taking a moment to, one, acknowledge that with our reconciliation effort, there is a long way to go, but also acknowledge that not all the voices are represented in the room tonight. So I'm just going to invite you to hold that thought as we are talking about this important topic. And also, before we get started and introduce the panelists and jump right into this, I would like to invite Debra Wang, the artistic director of DesignTO, to also speak a little bit about the festival and give us also kind of a sense of what's happening this week.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, I'm Debra. I just want to say DesignTO is a nonprofit arts organization that produces Canada's leading and largest annual design festival. It's a festival where art and design and people meet at over 100 events and exhibitions across the city. This is our 10th year. You may have seen that in our marketing. And since 2011, DesignTO has celebrated creativity, fostered community, and welcomed experimentation. So welcome to the Future of Workers and Brave Organizations, to echo Simon. We want to thank you to our partner, The Moment, and supporter Technion, whose gorgeous space we are also in. So they are the generous hosts of tonight's, or this afternoon's event. And I want to say thank you to the entire DesignTO team, as well as Simon Mahena and Tiffany Elliott from The Moment for being our partners. And this is day 7 of the festival, so there are 3 more days. So I hope to see you again. We have festival guides out on each of your chairs. Take them home, see what else. There are some things that also extend beyond the end of the festival, as well as some articles in the back about some of the programming and speakers. Now I'll hand it back to Simon. Thank you.
Off? Good, okay. So, welcome friends. Please join me to welcome Laura Zizzo, Peter Aprile, and Michelle Moore on the panel. I'm going to make a declaration up front and say, we're friends, we know each other pretty well. We are part of a community of practice called Brave Works, where we get to actually come together and talk about the topics related to organization design and self-management on regular basis. So this will feel kind of our normal kind of thing, but maybe with a bigger audience. I will let you also introduce yourselves, but also another thing to mention that for this event, I kind of hold different hats because I am an innovation designer at the moment and also a programs lead for the festival. So I'm trying also in this specific event to play 2 roles. One, bring the voice of the moment into the conversation and hold space. So it's not going to be the traditional kind of moderator kind of role where I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to intervene, provoke, and also share my opinions and thoughts on certain things. So just heads up. Before we start, I think I find it probably more relevant to let people introduce themselves in a way that makes more sense to them. So maybe we can start with Laura, just who you are and tell us a little bit about your organization and what role you play within that. We don't need like the long spiel, like just a quick introduction.
So I was 12 years old sitting on a log. No, I said that already today a couple times. So I'm Laura Zizzo, the co-founder and CEO of Mantle 314. We're an interdisciplinary climate change consultancy. So if we're going to work on climate, we obviously have to think about working differently, because the thinking that got us into this issue is not going to get us out of it. So that's pretty much how we got to thinking about Teal. And when I first read the book, Reinventing Organizations, I have to say, the first couple of chapters, I was like, this seems even more hippie than me. And I'm a climate change person, and I've been my whole life been saying like environmental and environmentalism, and felt pretty kind of left. And I thought, this is out there. And then I realized, oh, actually, this is what I've been trying to do since I started the law firm. Like, I started a law firm before the consulting firm, and just said we should do it differently. It shouldn't be based on billable hours. It shouldn't be based on hierarchy. It should be based on expertise and impact. And to read that book was actually so affirming and life-changing, and then to find this group that there's other people thinking like this is part of an evolution that we're seeing in the future of work, and it was quite comforting, and it's exciting to see the evolution occurring.
Thank you, Laura. Peter.
Hi, my name is Peter Prele. I am a tax lawyer, of course, and I work at a tax litigation boutique. We also have some tech stuff running. It's a bit of a weird space. What else do you want to know about me? I feel a little anxious today, specifically because my wife's here. My wife, I don't think she's ever heard me talk like this before. So I was super excited. So I went up to her and I'm like, "You're here. This is great." And I said, I gave her a kiss and stuff, and she looked at me, she's like, "Don't talk." So I'm like, "That's great, thanks for showing up." And then my colleagues here, Laura's awesome, and I got a ton of people around me who support me, so it's really cool. And so I was leaving, we were talking here, and I was leaving Laura, and I said, "Laura, do you have any words of wisdom or something I could take with me, because I'm feeling a bit nervous today?" And she looked at me and she said, "Don't talk." So we'll see how that goes.
Well, that doesn't work well for me, so we'll have to find a compromise. We'll have to find a balance, Peter. Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Don't let him fool you. He talks a lot. Yes. Just wait. Hi, my name is Michelle Moore, and I am in my second organization that is related to that topic of self-organization. I would say I was introduced by my fellow colleagues at Grant Book when I was interviewing for the position of managing director, and they were reading Reinventing Organizations in the book club. And so I kind of got handed the book in the interview process, and it was the first time that I was interviewed as a whole person. And truly, I mean, there were only 12 employees at the time at Grant Book, and every single person, I was introduced in some form or another to every single person, and they cared about the journey. My journey, how had I gotten to where I was that day? And that was amazing. And so I read the book, and it was fully in line with the other Kool-Aid I had drunk about 3 years ago, which was the Theory U Kool-Aid, which is a consciousness-based framework for systems change. So just layering on top of that Teal and Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organization, I just thought, I'm in heaven. And then, of course, you start getting into the weeds, and it's difficult. Then I come to ET Group, and this is a 40-year-old organization that is going teal. And wow, what a difficult situation when you come into an organization where there's a small group of people that have defined or have stated evolutionary purpose, and really the rest of the 40-year-old organization kind of is just nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that sounds good. And so the transformation of evolutionary purpose actually shifted in December when there was a big team connect, and the CEO of ET Group, Dirk, had this aha moment before that, where he came out on a video and said, I think this purpose statement that we came up with a couple of years ago, I think that's really been mostly me imposing that on other people. So why don't we revisit this again and see what the actual evolutionary purpose is? And that arose then in December at this Team Connect, resulting in my role disappearing. So we had been trying to create a collaboration advisory practice in a historic systems integration company, and the two just weren't meshing. And so what is wonderful about self-organization is we had this beautiful process for letting this new idea that wasn't incubating in the organization die, and shifting out roles and enabling people who are remaining, like others in the room, to bring their gifts to the organization. So that's kind of my introduction is I am no longer energizing a role in ET Group, and I'm moving forward to something in my own company as well. So that's maybe a little bit long, but it's a little radical, and I was very nervous about, should I be honest about that or not? But I think it is a testament to self-organization and the really holistic and communal way and positive way that happened.
Yeah, no, I think this is like a great way to kind of get us started. I know we've mentioned a lot of words that I will circle back to, but I also want to kind of give a sense of what the Moment's experience with this. So I joined the Moment, I would say, over 5 years now, and I would say from day one, kind of tapping into the story of the founders, they had those fundamental ideas about how they wanted to create an organization that is different than the traditional corporate world. So from day one, when I got to the Moment, we didn't have like a structure of a boss, or this kind of hierarchy was very kind of fluid. But we didn't really have the language of what we were trying to create. So we had a good understanding of things, and we had a good synergy within the team with some values and some kind of shared principles. But later on, I would say maybe 2 years into that process, we started reading Reinventing Organizations. And this is where we're like, oh, this is very similar to what we are trying to create. But at least this gives us now language to kind of codify this in a way that then we can share with others. So there was the lived experience, but as we were also thinking about growing the organization, that kind of gave us a sense of what are the kind of, what is that language we can use that other people can relate to, since it has been published, it's out there. And maybe for people who, I'm just gonna look at the room, who is familiar with Teal Organizations, the term Teal Organizations? Okay, this is, I would say, more hands than usual, which is good. But I can kind of quickly give you a sense of where this comes from. So we mentioned Frederic Laloux. So Frederic Laloux spent some time looking at different organizations who are trying to do things differently. And what he came into, or he summarized his, I would say, 3 or 4 years of research into this kind of system of colors. And he spoke about being in this moment in time where we needing to look at the organizations and the purpose of the organizations in a more evolutionary way. And he kind of gave it the name of Teal, right? And the idea behind it is that traditional hierarchies and traditional strategies are not working anymore. So we need to kind of find a new way to organize that is decentralized, not hierarchical, that enables people to really sense into what the organization needs to be without the limits or the barriers that traditional structures create. And he names specifically 3 pillars. One is evolutionary purpose, the second one is wholeness, and then the third one is self-management. So if I want to start maybe from the beginning and talk a little bit about the role of purpose, which I think Michelle did a really great job at kind of illustrating of the importance of a clear purpose statement. So I'm also curious to see, for Laura and Peter, what comes for you when you think about purpose, and what the articulated purpose job is within your organization.
Go ahead.
So did I already say what our purpose was? I think I said that.
You mentioned that, yes.
See, I say it 7 times a day, so I don't remember. Did I say it? Ryan says no, because the purpose of our organization is to shine the light on climate-related risk and opportunity and advance strategies to thrive. So we want to shine the light on climate-related risk and opportunity and advance strategies to thrive. And every day I say that probably 4 or 5 times and say, is this doing this? Is this driving towards that purpose? And I invite my colleagues to also think about that. And if we say, like, this is shining the light, then we want to do it. If this is not shining the light and it's for some other reason, then it's not for us. And we came up with that purpose over a series of like workshops, and it was a joint purpose, and we have iterated it, but that's stuck for about a year, and maybe it'll change, but for now it still feels right. And I certainly use that as a grounding force, and I think my colleagues do as well.
So it anchors the organization in a kind of an aligned and clear vision in a way for you. Peter, any thoughts on purpose?
Not many.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's our North Star, right? And so they always sound really cheesy and terrible. But like Laura was saying, like the question is, no one person holds that, no one person decides that. And so if you're looking through purpose, like the answer is there. So we were talking earlier about roles. So not only does our organization have a purpose, but each circle in the organization and every role in the organization has a purpose. So I hold a few different roles, too many, frankly, right now. And each one of those roles has a purpose, right? And so I look through that purpose, and through that lens, I decide what the appropriate action is for that role. And so that shows up in a bunch of interesting ways when you have a bunch of people trying to look through separate purposes to guide their work. Like Laura was saying, on kind of like on a lower level, like on each role in the organization, these things come up. So the thing that came up recently is Antoinette, who's here. We had somebody in the office. I was meeting with somebody in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. Again, talking about self-management and all that other good stuff, that she raised the question, like, do you think I should be there in this meeting with this guy? And so should is a funny word in our organization now, and like the only response is, what does the role's purpose call you to do? And like, that's it. And I don't know whether she's going to show up the next day or not, and it doesn't really matter to me, because I think that through viewing her work through the lens of that purpose, she'll either be there or she won't be there, and that will be the right decision. So it's just a complete shift on how you're being directed, or reliance on other people to direct you. And it seems to lead to the right answers more often than not.
Yeah, the interesting thing about purpose, I think it's one of those things that became a little bit of a catch-all phrase in the media for a while, and people are now saturated with like purpose-related articles and stuff.
Yeah,
but for me, I think what's interesting is like, because there's now this kind of movement against a purpose statement, and in our context and the way we run our organizations, like the articulation of a purpose liberates people to go into their work, right? So like at the moment we say purpose is boss, right? So we don't need now to go to a specific role or a specific person holding roles to kind of validate if our decisions make sense or not. That comes back to us because we have that reference. So this is what kind of Peter was, what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's scary though, because sometimes, like people, especially those of my colleagues who worked in more traditional organizations, are looking for guidance or permission or approval. And it's a practice for all of us to say, well, like, what do you think? What is the purpose of this? How can you fulfill this? And that, like, we're not perfect, and every day we make mistakes on this, and it's a practice. So I don't want people to think like we know how to work in purpose all the time. We're not doing that, and there's a lot of experiences where that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. Like, so he talked about like this BraveWorks thing that, like, it was funny because I don't think we know what we're doing, and we're kind of stumbling our way through this. And when you mentioned the BraveWorks thing, I felt like saying, yeah, it's a group of people that get together to talk about like, why the hell are we doing this, and how do we do this, right? Like, and so like it's kind of uncomfortable when you see like all of you looking at us as if we actually know what we're doing. And and so, you know, one of the things that, like, when we started doing this and talking about it, it's this thing that nobody can really get their heads around, and we're kind of all trying to figure out, but it's the willingness to step forward towards that, and to not know whether like in some respects, not know whether your foot is gonna plant, right? You don't know, like you don't know if somebody's gonna make a good decision. You don't know if the direction you're going is the right direction, because it's a direction that nobody's really gone in before. And so that creates a difficulty, but it seems that the experience so far has been, although difficult and super painful and super awkward, foot keeps landing, and it's consistent with who I think we want to be as people and how we want to interact with other people. And I think that's what really underlies a lot of this. And when I read a lot about purpose and future of work and all that stuff in the media, like a lot of it's just marketing, right? And they're trying to box some thing, right, to get a workforce to move, right? Like it goes through the business decision to get here, right? And so I think what my experience with this is, and why I have a lot of love for a lot of people on the panel, specifically like Simon in the Moment, is like this is like a genuine intention. And you see people struggling through something that you can't do for a business purpose. You only do it because of how you want to be with other people and how you want to create a space for people to create their best work.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing that is coming up for me is how intuitive it feels, but when we're talking about it, but there's a lot of undoing, right? So a lot of like things that are kind of hardwired in our experiences now that now requires us to undo certain behaviors or beliefs that like work experiences kind of gave us. Which takes me to, I think, the second pillar in Teal, which is wholeness, and what it means to like remove, like I think Lalou speaks to it as like removing the mask and kind of breaking that barrier between who you are as a human and your professional persona in a way. So maybe, Michelle, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about what it means to be whole at work and how this comes to life, really?
So wholeness, I experience first as an idealistic word and a very beautiful thing to strive towards. And very quickly I realized that it's about vulnerability and being able to show your weak sides, being able to face mistakes. And I would say that the first time I ever saw other people cry or cried myself in an office setting has only been in Teal-ish organizations. And while that may sound sappy and awful, it is a growing and a bonding and a learning experience that I just recommend to everybody. And it's strange how this space for vulnerability is sometimes held well, and sometimes we don't hold the space for vulnerability well. And we try to confront that and talk about it. And so to me now, this definition of wholeness is also, can I be open about my own individual purpose and how it relates to the evolutionary purpose of the organization? And can we be clear about how those two things are different? That the organization has its own energy, its own evolutionary purpose, and we as individuals come into organizations to bring our gifts to further our own purpose, but ideally and hopefully it has to be aligned in many ways, of course, with the evolutionary purpose of the organization, but sometimes you will see tension related to that, and it's very difficult to be open about that and understand when is it time to separate and that sort of thing. So those are my two answers to that very complex question.
As someone who's trying to make sure the lights stay on at an organization, sometimes it's like, that's enough of you coming in as a whole person, then you have to realize, right? It's like, don't need to know so much about your dog, but okay. But then you're like, no, but that's actually the person, and if they can feel they're allowed here, we can probably get the best work out of them.
Yeah, and those things get in the way, right? So this is where there's this kind of diagram usually when you're looking at self-management and those conversations where they show you like the structure of the organization with like the traditional way with all the boxes, and then they say, there's another layer where they talk about how decisions get made and then it's all the relationships and all the emotional things and the dynamics that happen between the people. So yeah, I definitely relate to the crying. Like when you walk in the office and you see someone crying, it's like, yeah, just another day at the moment. And you know that it's not about like the work, it's something that it's kind of we're just putting aside or like expressing it so that it doesn't come in the way of the work that we're trying to do.
Sometimes it is about the work.
Sometimes it is, yes. I mean, we still like operate within like the bigger, the world and the other humans and other corporations, and we know it's not perfect. So there are moments where there are tensions and things that are not, that we cannot address with these principles and stuff. But in general, like the intention behind, we use the term at the moment, bring the whole person to work. It's like, you are welcome as you are, and we don't need to fake things. Yeah. You don't need to come in and pretend that you're not sick and sit at your computer just because you can't, you're like there's fear element or something from your boss or someone else. So it really gives people agency to like manage. And this is also the thing about self-management. It's about not only managing work and workload and time, it's also managing yourself, self-care, your health, and all of these other things.
Yeah.
Can I pick up the wholeness thing for a second?
Sure, yeah.
It's interesting because I see this differently than most. Like the wholeness thing is fascinating, but the way I pick it up is it's just a deeper appreciation of the fact that we're all human, and it's connecting with each other just on that level, and equal in our differences. And what's interesting is that when you start to, or at least my experience with it is that when you start to really understand that and tap into the people that you work with on that level, not kind of like in like the crying level, but like just like understanding people's value and people's equal value as humans. What's my experience is what's really interesting is you start to see yourself and you see them differently, and you start to understand on a much deeper level. At least my experience of this is that you start to really understand your strengths, and you start to understand the strengths of others. So the gifts that you bring and the gifts that you don't bring. And you start to appreciate that their gifts and the intelligence that they bring is actually the other piece of the puzzle that lets you both learn more. So, like, to me, wholeness, like, that's the key to collective intelligence. I always knew theoretically what collective intelligence was, and I thought I've seen it in practice before. But until you truly value another human's gifts as equal to yours, not like we just say that, like, yeah, he's kind of smart, but like when you truly view them as equal in the other piece of the puzzle, then I think you've accessed that side of wholeness, and it's only through that I've seen, and I've like been in a room where I'm like, holy cow, we just all literally, like we all just contributed to the solution and created something bigger than any one of us would have done alone. And that's a powerful force.
Yeah, and something that we practice that helps us get there, and I don't know if other people practice the radical candor thing, because it's hard to remind people, like, I care about you deeply and I know a lot about you because you come here as a whole person and I really care about you, but you're doing this thing that really is annoying me or upsetting me and we need to talk about it. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes in a workplace, and people don't feel like they have time for it often, but those can be really quick discussions and they have such value. So I feel like practicing that and making sure you don't let these tensions fester is, for us, part of this wholeness journey, even though we might not be labeling it.
And the fact, like, sometimes, as you said, they're just quick, short conversations that we can have. And we have practices where we check in when we start a meeting to see how we arrive. And if there's something top of mind that is getting in the way, I think it's important to surface that, right? So this is where we'll talk a little bit about Holacracy, where we talk about the differentiation between soul and role, and what do we need as people versus what does the role that exists as part of the organization requires to get the job done. So this is definitely a big aspect of the things that we kind of try to make sense of on a daily basis. And I think this takes me, since we're starting to kind of get into the self-management aspect, I want to recognize that, like, for you, Laura and Peter, like, there's the founder experience that might be a little bit different for me and Michelle, like, because we're not we're not founders in our organizations. That transition into breaking down the decisions, the pool of decisions and accountabilities to roles instead of having them held by a person. Tell me more about what this looks like from a founder perspective, and I think Michelle and I can speak to it from a little bit of a different angle.
Peter is really eloquent at this stuff.
No, I don't.
Tell us about Source,
No,
Peter.
I'm not talking about Source.
Okay.
Go ahead, you can do the founder thing.
It's really hard. I mean, you have this, like, just make a decision, Laura. I can make a decision, that's what I do. But like to not make a decision, or if, so a couple examples of things that come up. So I don't want to track time. I kind of mentioned that already. It's a little bit of a pet peeve, but our person who's trying to understand what's profitable files says, I can't understand what's a profitable file because no one's tracking their time. And we don't have to make it about, the value of the person and how well they're doing their job, but we actually have to understand what makes us money and what doesn't, and we don't have the metrics. So they sort of like overruled me, but we went through the decision and advice process, and I gave my advice, and my advice was consulted, and the decision was made that something that I wouldn't have done. And I'm totally fine with that. But other people are like, but Laura didn't want to do that. I really, really am. I've come to terms. But
So
another
not.
one that came up just the other day, we had a lunch and learn, and we ordered lunch, and I got my lunch delivered by one of my colleagues, and I looked over at my colleague and I said, I think that we're getting our lunch delivered. And she goes, no, that was just you. And I was like, what? What? And I'm trying to run, but so it still happens, right? Like I just was sitting there and got my lunch delivered, assuming that was we were all going to get it delivered. So it's really a practice. I haven't addressed that with radical candor with the person who delivered my lunch yet, but that's going to come. And yeah, it's something that we all have to practice.
And just also to make sure that when we talk about radical candor, it's a framework for feedback, so for people to sit and give each other feedback and not worry too much about just creating those tools to enable those conversations without worrying about impact in a way of like, can I give feedback to my boss or not, right? Peter.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to go near the founder thing. Founder's so overrated and romanticized. It drives me nuts. I'll pick up the point about the radical candor thing and something that you said earlier. What's fascinating is like, so when you're deconstructing an organization and you're asking people who have been moderately successful to rip down the thing that they built with a specific muscle that they've exercised and it's yielded some success, like you go back to that muscle a lot, and it's hard to let that thing go. And it's hard for people to, so it's what my experience is that it's hard stepping out of that role and out of using that power, and then it's equally difficult, if not more, for people to step into it. So those are the relationships that you're disrupting and creating, right? And so when we talk about radical candor and feedback and all that stuff, and like even we were talking, and maybe I was joking earlier about like crying and stuff like that. So like now you have a place where conflict is created, right? Like I joke that this is putting a virus into your organization willingly, right? So you've created complete disruption in your organization. And so how do you survive? How do the people in the organization survive that? And the only way that they survive that is figuring out how to do conflict in a healthy way. Like that's it. And so when we talk about radical candor or feedback mechanisms or things that we've implemented in our organization, like it's not avoid conflict. It's like, no, conflict creates like I love it, right? Like I feed off it. It's like there's an opportunity in there, and the question is, can both of us sit in the space and figure out what that opportunity is before we let our own egos and all that other stuff eat up the opportunity that we're seeing? And so like that's like part of the development of this is when you start butting heads, right? When your ego gets in the way and all that other good stuff. Like, can everybody in the organization pause and figure out, okay, what are the tools, processes that we're going to use to sit in this space together with the right intention and figure our way through this? And you start seeing stuff like that with people that you work with. That's a fascinating and really interesting thing to harness for yourself, for your own development, frankly, and for the benefit of the organization.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about tensions and how we use tensions in our organizations. But I want to recognize that, as you said, like there is a process of letting go of the power in a way that, as a founder, you like kind of have by default by creating your organization.
So
right?
like there's fundamental principles, right? And so the question is, what's your worldview? Like that's it. So the question is for me, do I believe that by giving up power I can get more powerful? That's the only question. Or is this a zero-sum game? Because if I believe that, giving something to you makes me less powerful, then why would it, like that's irrational. But that's how most of us move through the world, right? So if you're, like this goes back to like theories of abundance and stuff like that, right? The question is, if I give this to you, which by the way, that's a weird concept in and of itself, but we'll leave that. Like, do we both become more powerful? And so if you fundamentally believe that to be true, then how do you move through your organization? How do you move through the world?
So Michelle, I think I will also reflect on my experience, but on the other side of this equation is like all the other people in the organization having to step into that power space and really taking what's on the table. And I know like in our like human dynamics, then we sometimes just wait for permission, which sometimes it's just not given because it's just not how it works and how we work as a human. So there is also a level of effort that is required from people who are part of this group, who are part of this organization, to also claim that power. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how this comes up within ET or also the other organizations that you worked with?
Yeah, so I think the biggest learning for me was I spent 15 years in a global professional services firm, and 8 of those years I was an equity partner. And leaving a structure like that and coming into sort of your midlife crisis and then changing and moving towards social entrepreneurship organizations and Teal organizations, you really get hit in the face by, you've been this leader, you've been this partner, and everybody's bowed down to you, and then all of a sudden you're in this organization where no one really wants you to lead anymore because we're trying to be Teal. And so my big learning started at Grant Book with what is this difference between leading and holding space, right? Especially when you carry that title of managing director. Like, okay, you're still, to the external world, you still have these roles. Even in ET Group, there's a role CEO, right? And because the external world still needs these hierarchical roles. But internally, we've all agreed that this role is just something we're energizing, and the role is not the person. So the other big learning, one learning for me was, what's the difference between leading and holding space? And that's a whole conversation, but what's the difference between me, Michelle, the person with the big ego, right? And the role that I'm energizing, or the roles that I'm energizing, right? And that is still a learning process because ego constantly gets in the way. And it's just this awareness, what is our own, so self-management is about managing ourselves in the context of self-organization, right? And this is hard work, and it's painful, and we make mistakes all the time. So if anyone has an illusion that this is, the yellow brick road, my colleagues have said it, but it is the mistakes in your face that you are making yourself, also still because of ego, is a huge thing to combat. And recently, we were at a training together where we practiced speaking from role, like in a meeting, versus speaking as Michelle, and making that differentiator. Okay, now I'm speaking as me, Michelle, I'm upset about this, but when I speak from role, completely different sentences come out, right? And that is super hard. So I think that's enough.
Yes, I mean, it's, which kind of takes me a little bit to, since we're talking about roles, it takes me to Holacracy, which is like one structure that we use for like self-management. So, and the idea of Holacracy is like running the organization on, I would say, a hierarchy of circles, and people hold roles in different circles. So again, this is where purpose is the boss. We have a clear mandate within our circle and specific accountabilities that are written and codified in the organization in a way that creates transparency, creates a clear expectation of what you are accountable to, and a system also of, I would say, of like metrics that also kind of hold people accountable to the things that they're supposed to deliver within their roles. And Also within Holacracy, so there's no job titles. There are just a bunch of roles, and you can fill and unfill roles as you go, which is also a system within of a governance that allows anyone in the organization within the scope of the purpose of the circle to edit the organization, which gets really interesting. So, and this goes back to your story about being edited out in a way, because that role now became irrelevant. You as Michelle, you are still relevant, but that role, or what that role is supposed to serve, is not relevant for the organization at that point. And also knowing that when it comes to roles, it's kind of capability-based, right? It's merit-based. So it's not because X person, I have a certain authority or something, I'm just gonna grab power in a way. So there is a system in it that says, if you have the skills, if you have the right energy for this role is yours, right? So we can talk a little bit, I don't wanna go too deep in the rabbit hole of Holacracy, but the intention of now that everyone can edit the organization can evolve and change based on what people bring beyond just, let's say, the one founder or the board or the executives in the organization. I'm just wondering what's because we talked about how predictable and unpredictable it is and how comfortable and uncomfortable it is. Just also kind of speaking a little bit to the value of this. I just don't want to focus on the negative aspects because we know it's not perfect, but what comes up if you're thinking about...
One thing I just want to say about this is it seems like it doesn't mean everyone's equal. And a lot of the times people say, you're equal in your gifts and you're equal in what you can bring, but sometimes people have more experience and more insight on a certain file, and that's, respected. And it's hard because we don't even have the language to express what I'm trying to say, but I'm saying some people have more expertise. We are in an expert-based professional services firm. The people who just came out of school and have never worked in this, of course, are going to have a different set of gifts they're bringing to their roles than the people who've been working on it for 20 years and know a lot about consulting or know a lot about the technical piece. So it's not equal, and it's not decision by consensus either. It's actually less consensus-based in many ways. It's actually do you understand, do I have authority? Is this my decision to make? And so some people have a lot more kind of, this is my decision to make than others. And then it's who do I need to talk to make this decision? So I know you're not talking about decision making, but from us, we don't use Holacracy, but we use the advice process for decision making as the guiding principle, and then we used a sense and respond in the advice process. So those are kind of the only main processes we use, and everything can kind of work.
Yeah, so the principles are the same. I know there are different frameworks. So I know Peter your organization runs on Holocracy, the Moment, but...
I at this point in the conversation, I wonder who we lost and who's still with us. So I'll try to explain it this way. So all this is making everything that's implicit in your organization explicit. That's it. So everything you do is written down on a list, and so you know everything that everybody does, and they know everything that you does, and it runs complete transparency through the organization. So you know what everybody's accountable for, and they know what you're accountable for, and it allows you both, with that transparency, to hold each other on account. That's it. And so it doesn't matter that I founded the firm, right? You give me and I give you a pathway to hold each other accountable, and we have an agreement around that. So it's that kind of explicit framework that allows us to understand who should do what and why. When we're talking about roles, so if you've made every role in the organization explicit, then you can see all the roles in the organization. And the other thing that it does is it creates a role marketplace. So what that means is I can jump in and out of roles as my career progresses or as my interests shift and change. So I often say, if you can't work at Counter, you can't work anywhere. Because if we're doing our thing right, roles should be popping up and being destroyed as the organization evolves and as your career evolves, right? So, why should you have to leave in an organization? That is a symbol of the fact that they didn't provide you with the opportunity. Why would you ever need to go work somewhere else? That is a signal or a symptom of the fact that organization, assuming you're good at your job and all that good stuff, but that's a symbol that organization couldn't give you what you needed from that organization. So if you create a role marketplace, or when you have a role marketplace, you have people bouncing in and out of roles, and that's not stigmatized in any way. So if I choose not to do this anymore, not to do this role anymore, then I have another interest. Then I have 5 roles, let's say the 6th role, I find another one. And so it's that kind of agility and adaptive nature that making things that are implicit, explicit. When we talk about people being equal and all that, it's people often read this as, oh, you're a flat organization.
That's what
like,
I mean.
yeah, we're not, like, no. Like, this is not flat, right? There is absolutely a hierarchy. I absolutely adore hierarchies. What it's not is a power hierarchy, right? It's not, there's no positional authority. Because I've been there for 10 years doesn't mean anything. I'm in this role and you're in this role because you have demonstrated expertise to energize this role and execute on it. And so we have a 3rd-year lawyer that is working on files like a 7, 8-year lawyer, because it doesn't matter that he's been there for 3 years. Or it shouldn't matter. So how do you create an organization, and what are the structures do you create to allow that to happen?
Whenever I hear Peter talk, though, I feel like, oh, we have so much more work to do. So that's the thing, right? Like, it's a process. We don't have our roles well developed. At our last meeting, everyone was like, where are the roles again? I don't know. Like, but it's a process, and it takes time to kind of get it right. And it's never going to be right.
And it's like, that's the thing. There's no end destination here, right? Like, you don't say evolution is over. Like, that's not a thing. And so, like, our organization will shift. People, as they look through purpose in these roles, we talked about evolutionary purpose earlier, right? Like, it's the collective intelligence that will shift the direction of the organization, as opposed to me saying, hey guys, this is where we're going today. Because that's just one voice. And what makes that the right voice? And how arrogant do I have to be to say, that's the direction and let's go? Like, and how silly does everybody else have to be like, okay, like, come on.
So I'm just going to use kind of looking outward a little bit, and the work like we do with at the moment, since we are an innovation design studio, and we work with a lot of traditional organizations, and we know how much like effort and time is wasted to kind of be creative and go around the system instead of actually having the conversations, right? And a lot of the work we do, like we work with, like do research with like front line teams that actually have a better sense of what would work better for their job, for them to deliver a better service, right? And those decisions are made somewhere else in the organization. And just sometimes when we start like putting our organization design and our principles and try to kind of imagine what this would look like in a more traditional context in those organizations, and how much the work would be productive and easier, and how the energy would be channeled in the right places instead of it being wasted in politics and kind of working around the system instead of working within the system. This is where, like for me also, I see the value of what we're trying to do within our organizations. So, which kind of takes me to kind of the last part of our conversation, because I know you will have a lot of questions, and we'll be using the rest of the event to kind of address these. But I just want to kind of speak to also, like if I'm stepping back and looking at this, and all of this sounds intuitive in a way. It sounds like, oh yeah, we can get to be the person who we want to be, the organization is responsive, we have a clear purpose that is aspirational, all of these things, which is great. But in reality, is it that simple? And this is where I think I'm interested to kind of speak about why we're doing this as organizations and how much of an investment it is for us and why.
Oh, you're looking at me. Well, I think the one thing I want to leave on is like trust. Because I think a lot of this is about, do you trust people? And are people inherently trustworthy? And why would you want to work with people that aren't? And we don't. And if you actually trust them, then you don't need management. Because self-management's going to work better if you trust them to do their best work and fulfill the roles within the organization. So for me, it's like people are inherently trustworthy and good. And if we let them feel that the organization believes that, and the people who founded the organization and are seen as leaders in the organization believe that we can trust them to do their best work, it's amazing the results that you can get. So that's why I'm doing it.
I can say why. I think the experience of working there's a level of beauty of interaction with the humans and the way you relate and engage with them in this type of organization that makes things more fun, more meaningful, and I'm still energizing a role in the board of Grant Book, so I still stay connected to that organization. I don't think I will ever lose connection to the people that I was engaged with at ET Group, because the depth of relationship and co-creation that happens in those environments where the space is held for this wholeness and evolutionary purpose and all of that is so deeply meaningful that you can't put value. I mean, it's just, to me personally, that's just the highest value. And I can never go back to working in any other type of organization. So I'm gone, yeah.
Yeah, I echo the human element of this. The one thing I'll add is, so the question is, it's like, to me, it gets to be like a really simple question, which is, how do you create a space for creators to create? That's it. And how does the current structure stop or curtail or hinder people from being creators or creating their best work? Like, that's it. And that's what we all are in all of our organizations at different times. And so, it's just, like, if I want to be the most powerful creator that I can be, what does that organization need to look like? So how do I serve other creators, and what does that need to look like? And so when you start to put that human element as well as that creation element together, that's kind of, to me, that's the big thing behind this. Now, the business reasons come, right? I don't think you get there looking through the business reasons. Like, this is, like you talked about, why it's hard and like what like, this costs real money to hold space for. Like, when you're disrupting your organization and conflict happens, like, you're holding space while this cost is happening, right? So, yeah, it is certainly not for the faint of heart. But again, I go back to my earlier point, which is, how do you want to exist in the world, and how do you want to interact with other people, and how do those principles actually get lived?
Yeah, and I think this ties into when we were naming kind of our community of practice, we went with Brave Works, and Brave was intentional to speak to basically, there's an aspect of bravery of kind of taking that leap and believing that there's something better out there and we can co-create that. And I think this ties to also, when I think about the moment's purpose, when we say empowering people to lead change and co-create a thriving human future, like, this is at core of what a human future looks like if we invest in the people, if we believe in the people. And we use, just gonna take what Peter was saying, is like conflict, or what we use tensions as a creative process, knowing that there's something better that we can kind of come to as we keep the structure open and keep the structure responsive to how the environment around us is changing, and how, as humans, we are also evolving and changing. So before we bring this to a close, I just want to make sure that if you feel complete, if there's something else that you want to share with the audience on this topic, anything that comes up.
The only thing that comes up, jumping off of what you said, is kind of that, like, the courage that's required. Like, I think it's way easier for me, right? Like, in my position in the organization, like, I chose this, right? Like, easy peasy. It comes with its own difficulties and all that other good stuff, but, like, to me, what's super, like, what like what's so impressive about this is the people that I work with and the courage that they bring to step into that space, right? Like these dynamics are happening all the time, and when you see other people step into space, like they could go work somewhere else that's way easier. Like I think counter's the hardest place to work in the world, because it demands so much of everybody, and everybody stays in that space together. So, like you see like founders or traditional leaders of organizations doing these talks and all that other good stuff. And we talk about like them as something different, but like they're holding space, and like without them this isn't possible. Without kind of a call and response to this isn't possible. And so that courage and that bravery is something that I think doesn't get spoken about enough. And it's a pretty neat thing to see.
It'll get talked about in the breakout.
Right, yeah. And I think for me, like maybe a good way to also tie this into, I think what might resonate with the audience, where I know probably are in the design field in a way or another too, is we don't have a blueprint for what we're doing, right? So it is a creative process. It is a design process where we are looking at challenges that come up for us, and we kind of use our best resources to find solutions for, and we know that solutions are maybe temporary, some of them might last longer, but we're kind of keeping an open mind, and we're willing to kind of experiment and engage with this challenge with an open mind, and also openness to whatever comes. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Laura, Peter, and Michelle for doing this. And thanks for all the time and your attention.